All right, another sharp dude who was kind enough, as I have said, I'm going to apologize to Luke Johnson ahead of time. I'm yelling and screaming the other night at one of my kids' sporting events, so I sound like I just rolled out of bed after drinking till 2:38, which I wasn't last night. I gave up the booze for Lent. I wish I was drinking till 2:38 last night, but I can't blame that. Luke Johnson from down in New Orleans. Luke, all the years that I've come down there to New Orleans broadcasting NFL games, how do you pronounce your paper?
It's the Times-Picayune.
Picayune.
Picayune.
Is that an old
yeah.
Cajun word? Help me with that.
No, actually, it's if I remember correctly, it's actually like a coin. Yeah, it's like an old. I think it was like a Spanish coin or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right.
So
Well,
that's actually where I came from. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for cleaning that up. Let's get right to it. Let's start with, we just had Rick Stroud on a few minutes ago. You know Rick, and we're bouncing around the NFL, and we've been zeroed in this first week on the NFC South. Derek Carr. What are your impressions on the Saints bringing in Derek Carr to be their quarterback?
Well, I mean, it's a big upgrade over what they've had, I think, the last couple of years. And I think there's an opportunity here for Derek Carr to prove that he's better than maybe what he's shown so far in his career. I think a lot of people around the league will tell you, there's when you have a guy who played for the Raiders for 9 years. I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to overcome. I mean, we've just seen how that organization's been managed. It's tough to succeed there. So I think there's a chance that he's better than what he's shown. And if that's the case, I think the Saints have a pretty good quarterback there. And if everything else remains the same, if their defense is able to hold up this level it's played at the last couple of years, if some of these young skill position players are as good as they showed last year, and if some guys get healthy, I mean, this is a lot of ifs. But the Saints are banking on all these ifs coming, playing out, and having this team be a favorite in the NFC South and get back in the playoffs.
Has he already gotten in there in New Orleans and embracing the organization, the town, the coaching staff, all that kind of thing? He being Carr, since he signed that free agent deal.
So he hasn't moved in yet, but when he came in and did his introductory press conference, which I believe is 4 or 5 days after he signed, so in early March before the free agency period started. I mean, he said all the right things. I think he's shown reverence for some of the greats that have played here, whether it's Drew Brees or even Sean Payton and the success those guys had together. He said all the right things about New Orleans, and this is really the kind of place where if you are deferential to the city itself and to everything that makes it great, people are going to love you here. And I think he's kind of understood that. I think he's made all the right steps to this point, but he's not here yet. And I'd expect that to change in the next month or so.
All right, let's back up a little bit since free agency happened and they bring in Carr. You talked about the defense a little bit, but expound upon that a little bit, if you would, Luke Johnson, because there are some guys that have walked out the door as free agents. How do they feel about the defense right now leading up to the draft?
I think they feel pretty good about it. I think their back end is really solid. I think their two starting safeties, Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu, are as good a combo as you're going to find in the NFL. I think Marshawn Lattimore, when he's healthy, I think is still a top 5 corner in the NFL. And then they got 2 young guys that they're really fond of, and Alontae Taylor, the 2nd-round pick last year, and Paulson Adebo, their 3rd-round pick the year before. Both of those guys played really well last year. It starts there. I think their linebacker core is solid. But this is ifs. If Demario Davis is still able to play the way he has been at 34, you feel pretty good about him. Pete Werner, I think, had an excellent year last year when he was healthy. So this is all these caveats, right? And then you look at the defensive line, and that's really the area right now where you can see them potentially taking a step back. Cam Jordan is not getting any younger. He's stayed as a very productive player for his entire career, but at some point you have to wonder, when it's going to fall off. They're going to have an entirely new defensive interior. They let both of their guys go, and David Onyemata, who signed a $12 million a year contract. They're never going to match that. I think that's a big overpay for him. And Shy Tuttle, who he signed a $5 million a year contract with the Panthers, and you could probably find a lot of guys like Shy Tuttle. I think that's probably a good move not to bring him back, but you're going to have new guys who you don't know as well. And then, on the other defensive end spot, they ended the Marcus Davenport experiment. He was never healthy enough to deliver on his potential, so they let him walk. And now they got to figure out whether Peyton Turner, their first rounder from a couple of years ago, is going to make it in the NFL. He's only played like maybe 10 or 11 games in his career since they picked him. They got to find some impact guys there, I think, because their defensive line is critically important to what they do. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me to see them go D-line 1-2 in the draft later this month.
All the years I was coming down there and doing games, and Breeze was there, and Peyton was there as a coach, I think a lot of people who didn't see the Saints play regularly thought they were just a slinging around kind of team. They actually were not only a great passing team, they year in and year out were among the top 3, 4, 5 running teams in the NFL. They have a defensive-minded head coach now. Peyton was all about the offense. What's the identity going to be like now with this team, do you think, offensively? Or are they still looking for that identity?
Yeah, I think they still are. And look, a lot of this depends on who Derek Carr is, right? And I think there's a lot of talk around here about Derek Carr playing kind of a similar game to what Drew Brees did, right? And that's being somebody who's like in full command of the offense. It was one of the reasons that New Orleans was an attractive spot for him, frankly. Is they want somebody who's going to come in and be in control of this thing, and is going to have a couple different plays when he goes up to the line of scrimmage, and he's going to make the call, But at the same time, when I think you're looking at what Dennis Allen wants to do, there's no doubt in my mind he's one of the more conservative coaches in the NFL.
Yeah.
Right. I think there was this stat that just boggled my mind. I figured it out in like week 16 last year, but they went like the last 12 games of the season, I think up until week 18, like without attempting a 50-plus yard field goal. It's like that sort of thing where he doesn't go for it a lot on fourth down, and he doesn't want to attempt these long field goals. He's very conservative, and I think that's going to play out with the way this offense looks. I think they're going to be a run-heavy team. I mean, there are going to be games when Derek Carr's throwing it 35, 40 times, but that's not what they want to be. I think that's why they made it a priority to go out and sign Jamal Williams. And I wouldn't be surprised if they added another running back to the mix, because that's kind of what they want their identity to be. They want to grind teams at dust on defense and offense. And now you got a better quarterback who can then kind of play off of that and take advantage of that a little bit better than they have in the last couple of years.
Not following the team every single week, what happened to Alvin Kamara?
I don't think he's any different than the player he was in 2019 than he has been the last 2 years. The problem is that they haven't had good quarterback play. He has been the only player on that offense that anybody has to worry about. And then on top of that, the Saints are using him in a completely different way than they have been. Yeah, I don't think Alvin Kamara is at his best when you're just running outside zone 15 times a game and slamming him into the line. And it's basically what they've been doing. I mean, he's set career highs and touches both of the last 2 years. He's been dealing with injuries both times. And then, I think there was like a 4 or 5 week stretch last year where he's facing 60% of the 60% of the time he's touching the ball, he's facing an 8-man box. Right. This is just not going to work. I think that's why it was important for them to go out and get somebody who's a capable number two. It was important for them to go out and get a quarterback who teams are actually going to fear. It's important for them to develop another wide receiver outside of Michael Thomas. They have all these things now. I wouldn't be surprised if, after Kamara deals with whatever sort of discipline he's going to get from the league, if he has a big bounce back year and his efficiency numbers go back to being what they were in 2019 when he's averaging 5+ yards a carry instead of the 3.8 or 4.0 that he's averaged the last couple of years. I just think they're going to have to use him differently to make or to take advantage of his really explosive skill set, because we just haven't seen that for 2 years now.
All right, you mentioned the draft, and I think it's 29th overall, right, in the opening round for the Saints. The question is, and we wonder the same thing here in Cincinnati, because the one thing you talked about, the defensive line, the Bengals have some good players, your old buddy Trey Hendrickson, and they've got Sam Hubbard, and they got some other guys that some pressure on the quarterback, but they feel like around here they're really missing that guy to get to the quarterback. Can you find that guy in the first round with the 29th pick?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be a handful of guys in this draft who are potentially impact players. And the challenging part for the Saints is they have a kind of very specific prototype that they look at. So guys like Nolan Smith, the Georgia kid who blew up at the combine, probably not going to fit the Saints prototype, right? Because they look for big, strong defensive ends who are going to hold the edge in the run game as well. Yeah, Cam Jordan is like their prototype, 6'4", 280. So it kind of limits what they can do there. And they have the same sort of prototypes for their defensive interior, and it makes they kind of obviously are a match for a guy like Pittsburgh's Kalijah Kancey, but they hold these numbers very, very. They're really important to the Saints, right? So I don't know if I could actually picture them taking a defensive tackle who's 6 feet tall and 280 pounds. But I think sometimes you got to be like, okay, we're picking number 29, and this is the guy who's available, and he has this great skill set that we could figure out a way to take advantage of, even though it doesn't fit our normal numbers. I think. Keon White, the Georgia Tech kid, I think I really like his game. Kalijah Kancey, I think, is going to be there, toward the back end of the first round. I think he can be an impact defensive lineman. I think one of the draft's kind of late risers here is LSU's BJ Ojulari. His brother has played at a pretty high level with the Giants, and I think BJ might be an even better prospect than Aziz was. There's guys I think who are going to be, you can get impact pass rushers later in the draft. It's just they're not going to be, they're not going to fit all the toolboxes or toolbox checklists, right, like Will Anderson will at number 2 or wherever he's picked.
Last thing I have for you is at least if you're a Saints fan, and we talked about this with Rick a little while ago, on paper. And, we'll find out what the Panthers are going to do. Is it Stroud? Is it Young? Whatever the case may be. On paper, the Saints have by far and away the best quarterback in the division in a quarterback-driven league. So if you're looking at a division and you're not looking around at a bunch of other guys in your division that are necessarily standout or big stars, have Joe Burrow in your division, have Josh Allen, those kinds of guys, that's something to hang your hat on, I would think, in New Orleans.
Absolutely. It's why they made it such a priority to go out and get a quarterback. Look, that should always be a priority, right? But they see an opening here. They saw it last year too, right? Because you got to remember that last year, before the season started, when they're going into free agency, Tom Brady had retired at that point. So they're like, the NFC South is wide open, and they ended up being right about that. They just overestimated how good their own team was. And they weren't prepared for a pretty brutal rash of injuries again. They got to be feeling great about where they're at right now. But I don't think they can just rest on that, because I really do think the rest of the NFC South is, maybe with the exception of Tampa Bay, which is kind of, it looks like doing a soft rebuild here. I think the Falcons and the Panthers have had really strong off seasons, and if they nail this draft, they could be pretty good in a year or two, maybe even this year. Falcons were competitive last year with terrible quarterback play. So, I don't think they can just bank on being the favorite and going out and getting it done just because they have Derek Carr. Like, they really have to hit this draft. They got to set themselves up with good young players for the next 4 or 5 years, because, obviously they're perennially in this salary cap problem. So they're off to a really good start, but they really need to finish strong here.
Well, it's one of the best, if not the best. When the Saints are good, there is nothing like going to a Sunday game down at the Superdome in New Orleans. That place is just unbelievable. The fans are unbelievable. It's the same for college football too, but it's just great stuff. And Luke, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today. Thank you so much. A happy Good Friday and a happy Easter to you and your family.
My pleasure. Thanks, Thom, and same to you and yours.
Thank you very much. Luke Johnson, kind enough to join us from down in New Orleans.